Welcome to the world of scale modeling with Mike Ashe, where techniques, tips, and creativity come alive with dozens of tutorials, projects, tape-up reviews, and picture references to help you build better scale models and enjoy our wonderful hobby. Welcome to Part 5 of our 7-part series on super detailing the Tamiya 1:350th scale USS Missouri. In Part 5, we'll start airbrushing. The first step in the hull painting process is to mask the brass pedestals and set the model upside down on blocks of balsa wood for the application of the primer. After the primer was dry, the hull was flipped, secured to the working base, and then the main deck and superstructure were primed. The model received 2 coats of primer on the main deck and superstructure, and then the superstructure was checked for any flaws and voids. This deck insert created a void along the base of the superstructure. It's being filled with tiny drops of white glue, which is then contoured with a damp Q-tip. Several applications of white glue applied with a 0.012-inch diameter stiff wire were needed to completely fill the void. The area was also primed between applications, which showed one area that needed more white glue. The voids around the 20mm platform insert were also filled with tiny drops of white glue applied with that stiff wire applicator and then contoured with a damp Q-tip. The red hull line was set with small lengths of masking tape applied along the tiny raised line along the hull. Long lengths of masking tape were then applied onto the hull, and it's very important that the bottom edge of these long lengths of masking tape butt up against the smaller lengths that set the red line. To mask the curve around the stern, a thin length of masking tape was applied so the tape would follow the contour of the hull. Exposed areas of the hull were then taped off with large sections of tape with a whole lot of overlap to ensure that no airbrush dust would get underneath the tape. A few drops of flat black were added to the flat red color so that the resulting color would be a deep dark blood color, and it was airbrushed onto the hull, and the hull received 2 coats. The airbrushed dark red color looks great, and the demarcation line is very sharp between the red and the primer color. To paint the upper hull area, strips of masking tape were applied along the edge of the red color. The entire lower hull was then masked off with lots of masking tape and a lot of overlap between the tape sections to ensure that there would not be any overspray. The forward area of the hull was then airbrushed a flat gull gray color. With the hull flipped, a length of masking tape set a level lower line for the bow flat gray color. The upper edge will be used to set another length of masking tape to cover the flat gull gray color. The length of masking tape on the bow area covers the flat gull gray color. This masking will set that color for the bow area and the Missouri's distinctive measure 22 hull color configuration. To make a navy blue color, a little bit of gloss intermediate blue was mixed with a flat sea blue color. The result was a semi-gloss but a really nice navy blue color. Strips of masking tape cut 7/32 of an inch high were placed along the lip of the masking tape on the hull to set the height of the black boot stripe. Small strips of masking tape were positioned on the hull details to prevent overspray. Also notice that it's very important that the small strips of tape butt up against the tape on the lower hull. Strips of masking tape were placed on the hull, and the lower edge of this tape was positioned against the upper edge of the small masking strips. The small strips of masking tape were removed, and then the remaining tape was pressed down along the edges and on the hull to ensure that everything was nice and tight. The boot stripe was then airbrushed with 2 coats of a flat black color. With all the masking tape removed, the model is looking pretty good, and the demarcation lines are nice and sharp between the colors. Note the semi-gloss appearance of the navy blue color. This will get fixed when a clear flat coat is applied. Strips of masking tape were applied to the hull up to the top edge for the next airbrushing step. Note the small strips above the hull details. After the strips were applied along the hull's edge, the entire hull was masked with lots of overlapping tape. The main deck and the superstructure received 2 coats of airbrushed flat gull gray. All the vertical sides needed to be masked, and I started with the upper areas and slowly worked my way down. This masking process can be very tedious, and note that I'm using very small strips of masking tape. Note how the 20mm boxes and the splinter shields are masked with very small strips of masking tape. Note how the masking tape was applied to all of the vertical surfaces in the bow area. Again, using small strips of masking tape works best. The lower superstructure sides were masked next. Note how the small sections of masking tape overlap one another. Airbrushing a measure 22 on a ship model is a very tedious process, and it takes hours of masking in order to achieve it. Taking a break between your masking efforts is the best way to work with these small strips of tape all over the superstructure. Note how the masking tape on the lower areas of the superstructure sides are set against the deck edges. Check all the masking to be sure every section is tight against its vertical surface to prevent any overspray. Navy deck blue is a lighter shade of the navy blue color. To get my deck blue color, I mixed a little more intermediate blue into the flat sea blue color in order to get this lighter shade. All the exposed horizontal surfaces were then airbrushed with 2 coats of this color. With all the masking tape carefully removed, the measure 22 paint configuration is complete, except that the navy blue and deck blue colors have a semi-gloss appearance. Note how the flat gull gray bow color has a really sharp demarcation line. There were a few tiny areas where there was some paint bleeding under the masking tape, and these were touched up with a detail brush. Note how the stern area shows the semi-gloss navy deck blue color. This will change rapidly. The entire model received a coat of Tester's dull coat, which lightened up the navy blue and deck blue colors and also gave them a flat appearance. Now the stern area has a lighter shade of the deck blue color, and the semi-gloss paint appearance has disappeared. The bow area also looks much better with a flat deck blue color, and note how sharp the demarcation lines are. This side view shows how good masking technique results in an exquisite measure 22 paint configuration. Note the difference in colors between the vertical navy blue color and all of the horizontal deck blue colors. The propeller shaft assemblies and the rudders were also airbrushed the same hull color and then given a coat of Tester's clear dull coat so they would match the color of the hull. Using balsa strips and masking tape folded over itself is a great way to attach parts for airbrushing. To airbrush the undersides of assemblies, elevate them on sections of balsa wood so you can paint the undersides. Priming allows you to check the assemblies one more time for any flaws before applying the finished coats of paint. White glue was applied into these tiny voids with a .012-inch stiff diameter wire and then contoured with a damp Q-tip. White glue sticks well to primer paint and other flat color surfaces. The void between the deck and the superstructure side was also carefully filled with white glue. All the upper superstructure assemblies were airbrushed with flat gold gray. The vertical surfaces were then masked for airbrushing the deck blue color. Each assembly required a slightly different approach for masking. Note that all the vertical surfaces were covered so that there would be no chance of overspray. The paint on the small raised surface sides for the positioning of the upper superstructure were scraped off so that the glue would have a strong bond. Airbrushing at a low pressure of 15 psi will get into the tight deck areas on this part. Note all the small lengths of masking tape used to cover the vertical surfaces. The tape around the splinter shields was also sealed at the top to prevent overspray. The aft smokestack vertical surfaces are completely covered, and there's lots of overlap between the sections of masking tape. There's a lot of overspray, and this is why it's important to seal all the surfaces that will not get airbrushed with lots of masking tape. When airbrushing small surfaces in tight areas, always use low pressure so the air will not push paint under the tape locations between the edges of the deck and the vertical surfaces. The deep mold punch-outs on this deck will not be seen because the upper deck will cover this area. The masking tape sitting against the outer edges of the deck was slightly pushed away even when using low air pressure because of the angle of the airbrush during spraying. The edges were touched up with a detail brush. The forward upper superstructure deck painting had to be done in 2 stages. The mid-level deck was airbrushed first. Additional masking tape was then applied to all exposed surfaces below the top deck. The splinter shields around the upper deck were then carefully masked, and then the deck was airbrushed. All the superstructure assemblies received a coat of Tester's dull coat, and now the decks have a much better deck blue color. Thanks to careful masking and using low air pressure, these parts look great, and they are ready for their photo etch railings. All the superstructure parts have sharp demarcation lines between the flat gold gray color and the deck blue color thanks to careful masking. The windows were painted using a .1 mm drafting inking pen. The edges were inked first, and then the center areas were covered. A coat of Tester's dull coat flattened the glossy appearance of the black color. The forward and aft smokestack tops were carefully masked and then airbrushed flat black. The sharp demarcation lines on this part really look good, and these 2 parts represent really good masking technique. Note how the 20 mm ammo boxes are masked. The masking tape seals at the top, which will make them easy to remove by simply pulling on the top of the masking tape. The inside areas of the splinter shields were masked first, then masking tape was applied to the outside areas. These parts were airbrushed with an air pressure of 15 psi. Note the sharp demarcation lines. Here again, careful masking makes all the difference in the world when airbrushing. This concludes Part 5 of our 7-part series on super detailing the Tamiya 1:350th scale USS Missouri. And stay tuned for Part 6 where we continue airbrushing and then start the assembly. Have a great evening and happy scale modeling! Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. And when you get the chance, visit our website at www.mikeashley.com, where you're going to find dozens of free PDF downloads, including tutorials, picture references, model galleries, projects, and my 5 original scale modeling books. Thanks to Ben Sound and Videvo for the royalty-free music, and happy scale modeling!